several issues which you have to consider when you think about or plan and design IPSAS implementation in a country. First of all, I would say, and the most important probably, is a non-technical issue. This is obviously to gain the support of politicians and key decision makers in the public sector. I think there are different suggestions and recommendations how to get over that. Obviously, I think what you have to do is to kind of clarify that an IPSAS implementation project is not a purely technical project. We are not only talking about an accounting reform, we are talking about public finance management reform in order to improve decision-making procedures and accountability and transparency by policymakers and parliamentarians. I think once you have made this step, you will get the support of politicians, but you have to clarify the benefits for those who need to be in support of this project. So that's the first challenge I think you have to overcome. The second challenge more often is capacity and capability. I think very often you face the situation where kind of the responsive ministries or entities in the government do not have the capacity on one side, so resources, purely calling or kind of talking about numbers, but also the capability in terms of accounting knowledge, accrual accounting knowledge in specificity. Very often these entities are coming from a cash-based environment, and therefore they lack of knowledge of accrual accounting, and they lack of knowledge in kind of project management of such a huge undertaking as an IPSAS implementation for a whole of government is. So that's the second challenge. And the third challenge obviously is then, and that is a technical challenge, is obviously the underlying IT system. In most cases, you will not find an IT system which is capable of supporting such an implementation. And you have a very complex IT environment, not only talking about an ERP system, but also talking about complex interfaces to subsystems. And if you don't deal with these interfaces, obviously you're running a huge project risk of not being successful in the end. And the last or second technical challenge, obviously, is the first initial stock taking and measurement of assets and of liabilities as a starting point in an opening balance sheet. Obviously, this is a huge and major undertaking which should not be underestimated, given the huge assets, especially in the area of infrastructure, which governments normally have. When we talk about social benefits, we talk about social risk, which is impacting individuals. And this is, from a definition perspective, very closely linked to the definition of statistical accounting. It was important to the board to have a close connection between financial accounting and statistical accounting in that sense. So we are talking about all cash transfers which are provided to citizens in order to kind of provide them with some kind of welfare or to kind of address risks, social risks of citizens. Yeah, leasing obviously is a project which was triggered by IFRS 16, which is a standard which is issued by the ISB. And obviously the board is following two working paths. One working path is to have convergence or alignment with IFRS standards where suitable for the public sector. And the other work stream is obviously to come up with solutions which are public sector specific. In the context of the leasing project, I think we have an interesting mix between the two, because obviously the board decided that for lessee accounting, the suggested solution of IFRS 16 would work in the public sector. But the lessor accounting as proposed by the ISB was not found to be suitable for the public sector. And this is where the CAG come into the game again, because obviously constituents provided very heterogeneous feedback on the suggested approach of the IPSASB, because they said on one side, follow the accounting for lessee, but do deviate from the accounting as suggested by the ISB for the public sector. Not all constituents were happy with that, and obviously the response received back were very heterogeneous. And so the board went back to the CAG and asked them, what is your view on that and how should we proceed? And that's a perfect example where kind of the CAG really plays off and pays off to have been established 3 years ago. We had two meetings where we touched upon the issue of blockchain. In June 2018, we had somebody presenting the opportunities of blockchain, not only in the financial context, but also in the context of non-financial processes and procedures, such as applying for a passport, or in the context of a healthcare system where blockchain could be very useful. Obviously, it is also very useful in the context of financial procedures. And this is where we had a presentation of Portugal regarding their implementation experiences and project, which is currently running, and looking at the possibilities and opportunities of using blockchain, especially in the context of consolidation, in order to avoid consolidation differences between different government entities. And therefore, this is a very promising approach. We are very curious how that will go on. It was also in the context of the Portugal implementation project that Luis Viana from the Ministry of Finance of Portugal mentioned that they are looking into using robot process automation for classes of transactions like accounts payable especially. So in all areas where you can work with e-invoices, electronic invoices, I think that is an area where you can use robots and technology in order to kind of deal with mass data, and in that context avoid mistakes on one side, but also be very efficient and not using many human resources any longer for very boring work, obviously. The next standards which we will see, and this will take some time, I would say, are standards in the revenue area and in the non-exchange expense area. In the revenue area, I think probably we will firstly see a standard which is converged with IFRS 15, which contains transactions with performance obligations. I think a little bit more time will be needed for all transactions which have not purely performance obligations or have no performance obligations. In other words, are standards which are covered by IPSAS 23 at the moment. The mirroring perspective is for non-exchange expenses, where the board decided to follow kind of a mirroring approach. And so I think you will see these standards in the same ordering. What you will see very soon is the just approved standard on social benefits, where the board managed to get that out of the door after, and I'm reluctant to say, a very long time, nearly 16 years of kind of an ongoing and paused discussion on this subject. This is to be published probably in January 2019. So I think the board can be very proud of this achievement, actually. I think probably the biggest difference is the motivation. If a mature country is deciding to implement IPSAS or to start such a reform, it is mostly internally motivated, which means that obviously there has been a period of preparation, a period of discussion, a period of assessment of the benefits versus the costs, and therefore kind of a higher motivation to get the project done and to follow a project map and a project path. Very often I have the feeling in emerging markets, it is rather an external motivation kind of provided or kind of triggered by donor organizations in kind of requesting reforms to be done. And I think that leads back to what I said earlier. Probably there has been a too high expectation in the past, which has now been corrected by the donor organizations in saying, okay, obviously we cannot expect the same pace, we cannot expect the same maturity of the starting point in these countries, and therefore there has to be a different approach. There's probably not a uniform approach, but I think the uniformity is that you have firstly to prepare all stakeholders which have to be kind of buying into this project. And that does not only mean politicians, but this does also mean kind of all which are involved at the ministerial or administrative level. in order to explain them what the purpose, what the benefits is, what the kind of the takeaways for them are, and that they will be taken with or in the project and into the reform and will not be left alone. I think you probably have to provide more training, you have to provide more convincing arguments and more security and certainty in these countries in order to make sure that they really buy in. Especially in the emerging markets or developing countries, I think there should be a diligent analysis of the given circumstances and the starting points of a reform. So don't be over-ambitious and I would say, don't be overestimating given information, given capabilities, given knowledge, but they do a realistic and kind of diligent stock taking of what is your starting point. I think international donor organizations like the World Bank have already realized that and just set up a new program, for instance, in Africa, which really deals with laying the foundations and not kind of being overambitious in kind of already requiring the implementation of accrual accounting without setting the foundations in terms of knowledge, basic knowledge of accruals, debits and credits, as you would start as a first-year student of economy. I think that is very important. So do a diligent stock taking. Probably try to kind of learn from other projects, but still design your own project. I think no project, no country is like the other. You certainly can learn the basic procedures and the basic project stages from other countries, but still do your own reform and just do not try to copy-paste reforms which have been successful in other countries but might not be successful in your circumstances.